everyone. Welcome to another episode of I Like Networking. Today we have Cassi Young, one of our mentors, and the specialist head of sale for the Modern and Contemporary Art Auction in London at Bonhams. She worked in the post-war and contemporary art department at Christie's in London, but also gained experience at Deutscher and Hackett in Sydney, as well as a variety of other institutions. She has a Bachelor of Arts with honors and a double master's in art history and curatorial museum studies from the University of Adelaide in Australia. This is a really good episode for you to understand some of the nuances of working in the art world. She has pursued a career in auction houses, and it's a very specific world, and it's really interesting to hear about her path, how she moved from Australia to London, how she manages the incredible stress she's in, and her lack of confidence and how she switched to a better mindset. So enough of me, let's go. All right, so hi Cassi, thank you for joining us. I'm very happy to have you on the podcast and also as a mentor of I Like Networking.
Thank you so much for having me, Isabel. I'm really excited to be here and to be a part of the program.
It's been so lovely. I mean, I stalked you on LinkedIn for you to come on board, so I'm happy that you didn't think I was a weirdo.
Never.
But I would like to know a little bit more about you and your experience and how you came to be in London, because if anyone hasn't figured out yet, you are originally from Australia.
Yes. Hopefully I haven't lost too much of my accent after 4 years here. So I think it comes and goes depending on who I hang out with at times.
So before we head on to everything about your career, just tell us, what is the worst job interview you've ever had, if you ever had one? You don't need to name names. You can just describe the situation.
Worst job interview. Do you know, actually, I haven't had that many bad job interviews, I have to say, touch wood. I'm touching my head at the moment. But I will say that probably the interview that I had for Bonhams, which is where I am now, I don't think I prepared enough for it. It was a really busy time. I sort of found out about the job a couple of days beforehand. It was right before Christmas. And I should have done a lot more of a thorough job at researching the company and sort of what they specialized in. And I sort of walked into the interview a little bit unprepared, and I think it kind of showed. So my now global head was asking me, what do you know about Bonhams? What do you know about department? And I came up really blank. It was a little bit embarrassing in certain parts, and I had to fumble my way through. But luckily, we connected on a different level. He also did the very terrifying, which I guess a lot of people would have done in the arts, where they quiz you on different artwork. So they'll just whip out a stack of images and say, tell us who's this by, who's the artist, blah, blah, blah. And most of them incredibly easy. You'll get like a Matisse or a Picasso or a Gerhard Richter. But he threw some curveballs in there, and I just sort of panicked and stalled. And I remember walking out of the interview feeling like I didn't do that well. But just goes to show that sometimes the worst interview you've had doesn't necessarily have to be that bad.
That's incredible. I mean, I didn't know that people did. I never had an interview and someone quizzed me on anything. So that sounds terrifying.
Yeah, it is, especially because, you're so nervous in an interview anyway. Your mind's sort of going into overdrive, and all of a sudden you get these images in front of you. And the worst is, who the artist is or which work, but my brain just completely froze up and I panicked. So that was probably one of the worst ones I've had.
So, Cassi, you obviously, well, not obviously, but you seem to have grown up and you studied in Australia, right, before moving to London.
Yes, yeah. So I grew up in Adelaide in South Australia.
Did you grow up surrounded by art? Did you always know that you wanted to work in the art world? Or how was that development?
Well, I was always kind of creative in the fact that when I was little, I would always do dance classes. I was doing ballet, jazz ballet, tap. I was also a musician, a classical musician. So I was learning classical piano and violin. I think piano from the age of 7 and maybe violin from the age of 10. Initially, I was sort of focused all of my energy on music, and I wanted to be like a concert musician, probably mostly with the violin. I went to a special music school. It was really dedicated, but it was incredibly intense. And I ended sort of flaking out of it, which was very disappointing after all the hard years of work. And I think it was a bit of a disappointment. But when it was probably about 16 when I realized that I no longer wanted to pursue music as a career. And I knew that I just couldn't go and do some sort of office job, or I still had to be surrounded by the arts essentially. And I was a bit of a history nerd, absolutely loved ancient Greek and Roman history. I, I think there was a stage when I maybe wanted to be an archaeologist, but I knew that that was sort of the route that I wanted to take. So I focused all my energy at school on arts and history, then applied to do a Bachelor of Arts at the uni in Adelaide with honours. And at that point, I'd sort of realised that I wanted to work in the fine art industry, and predominantly within the auction house world. And so it was during uni, and then I went on to do my double masters in art history and curating, that I intern constantly plus working, and I sort of just made it my goal to get into this industry. It was a really long slog, but I think in the end I was at uni for 6 years, and most of that I was interning on the side and working, but it paid off, and I was just really dedicated to it the whole way through.
What was it about the auction scene especially that got you hooked? Was it just because you started interning? But what was there this, because it's a very specific, how could I say this, aspect, I guess, or sector of the art industry?
It is. I think what I really love about the auction industry, and I know I can say that now, but I think I was definitely intrigued by this, is the commercial aspect of the auction industry. And I have to say, when I was younger, also the glitz and the glamour of it all, when you're looking at the evening sales at all of the big auction houses, it's all incredibly glamorous. Well, it appears to be very glamorous and exciting, working on blue chip artists and works, that perhaps have been in private collections for many years and then only come up to see the light of day at an auction house before disappearing into another private collection again. I found all of that incredibly intriguing. I think there's something about sort of almost like the hunt of doing a deal that I really enjoy. And it's just a completely different, you're right, it's a completely different lifestyle to that of, say, someone who works in a public institution, which I'd interned at the Art Gallery of South Australia quite a lot when I was going through uni, and I loved it. I really enjoyed it, met a lot of great people. One of my mentors is now, I think, the assistant director there. But there was, I just didn't really feel that the pace was suitable for what I wanted to achieve. And it's just, a different world that I really felt like the auction or the commercial world would offer me.
Yeah, that's fine. I feel like the pace it's very, very different in public institutions. So how is the art scene you were in Adelaide, so was there a lot of places for you to intern? Are the internships mainly unpaid? Like here, was it easy enough to get it while you're studying? How did it work? Because I don't know a lot of people from the arts in Australia, so quite curious.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I have to admit, I think the art market in Australia it's obviously a lot smaller. The population, is small in Australia, even though the country is huge. I think it's quite difficult there to make your step because, as with everywhere, people wanting to work in the arts, it's quite a popular thing straight out of uni or as you're studying. But to actually break into the industry in Australia, I think is as tough as it is here. So when I was in Adelaide, I did intern at the public institution there, but to gain the experience that I wanted, I had to intern interstate. So I did a stint in Melbourne for a few weeks where I interned full-time for one of the auction houses there, which inevitably led me to my first full-time role out of uni. So it was certainly beneficial. But yeah, I think the beauty of somewhere like London or say New York is that you have all of these incredible different institutions, museums, galleries, foundations together in sort of one melting pot city, whereas Australia, it's a little bit more difficult. It's incredibly spread out. And the opportunities you don't come across them as often. So you definitely have to be quite tough to break into the industry there.
Yes, I can imagine. I mean, yeah, you need to have tough skin for the art world, I think everywhere.
Exactly.
It's a competitive place. So what was this first mentor you mentioned when you were interning? Was it just someone that was more senior? Did you just have a connection? What was that relationship like?
So she was one of the curators at the Art Gallery of South Australia. And so the course that I undertook, well, my double masters, it was in conjunction with the University of Adelaide and also the Art Gallery of SA. And it was an incredible course because not only were you doing your history coursework at the uni, we also had hands-on interaction with all the curators at the institution, but also, with the marketing departments and the public learning departments. And it was a very all-rounded curatorial masters. And my mentor, Lisa, she was one of the curators, or she is one of the curators at the Art Gallery of SA. And she's just incredible. She's one of the most vibrant, enthusiastic people I've ever met. And she was quite instrumental in obtaining my internship in Melbourne that I mentioned. She sort of spoke to some people who I don't think had previously taken interns before. So I was really lucky that she pulled her strings for me. And yeah, she's incredible. I still catch up with her when I go back home to Adelaide and just keep in touch, because I think when you meet a mentor like that, they really stay with you. We don't keep in touch all the time, but I always value her opinion, and even just to have a chat with her, it's always really great.
Yeah, it's good to have that sort of experience when you're starting off as well, so you don't feel, because I don't think you know exactly what to do, right, when you're starting. You don't know how to behave, what are the rules, and so it is a bit overwhelming.
Yes, yeah. It is just so nice to have someone there to be a guide, essentially, when you need it.
Yeah, which is what you're doing now for someone else, which is great. So at what point did you decide to move to London? Was it just career-based? Was it difficult to do the switch?
It wasn't too bad. I always, in my mind, sort of had the notion that I would end up in one of the bigger cities, because I think, if you want to make it in the arts, or you want to try and really make a mark, not always, but I think, a lot of the times you do have to go to one of the bigger cities. And I'd always sort of had it in my mind to go to New York, but I was living in Sydney at the time. I'd been there for maybe 4 years, felt like I'd achieved what I wanted to, and decided that I wanted to move overseas. But New York was a little bit harder at the time with visa issues, whereas London, as an Aussie, it's a lot easier. You can sort of hop across the pond, get a work visa straight away for 2 years, and it's relatively simple. And to be honest, the other reason was that I had more connections in the art industry here in London than I did in New York, and I knew that that was going to be incredibly instrumental to my career. Choosing a city where maybe I only knew one person who could introduce me to people as opposed to 6 or 7 people, it just upped the odds of the chance of getting a job. Because when I left Sydney to move here to London, I didn't have a job. I sort of took it on a whim and just thought, you know what, I'm going to go for it, try my luck there. So yeah, I definitely weighed up the pros and cons, and London came out on top.
So how was the process? So I guess you had some people here which could direct you at least to places. And then did you just go around applying to things? Is it the same system as in Australia, as in you need to send like this cover letter and the CV? Is it similar? Because for me, that was the hardest. Like, I've never heard of a cover letter before moving to London.
Oh, really? Okay, yes. That's interesting. No, I mean, in Australia, cover letters, For me, it was all the same. I was really lucky, though, to have introductions, and it was a few people back home introducing me via email to certain directors at galleries or at auction houses, being like, can I introduce you to Cassi? She's moving to London. It would be great if you could just catch up with her. That was the process. And, I'm incredibly grateful to the people who did that for me 4.5 years ago, 5 years ago now. And so it definitely made a difference.
So I would like to get more into what you do, because I think some people who are listening to this, of course, are in the art world, so they'll know exactly what you do. So for those people, you can skip ahead if you want. But most people that listen to this are a mixed bag of creatives, right? So you are currently a specialist head of sale for the modern and contemporary art auction in Bonhams. What is it that you do? Like, tell us a little bit about how your routine is. more or less?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a contemporary art specialist, and that sort of encompasses all the things that the specialist would normally do. So it's about valuing artworks, it's about business getting, it's really about developing and maintaining client relationships and long-lasting client relationships. Um, it's about being an expert in your sort of chosen area, just making sure that you're on top of what's happening in the art world, so that you are seen as a specialist in your field. So you would usually try and there are sort of two aspects where you consign artworks to the auctions, and then there's the second side where you are selling the auctions as well. But on top of that, you're also sort of an advisor. I mean, a lot of the clients that I deal with, we might not actually do any business transactions for a while, but they will just come to me with their collection. They'll be like, look, I have this painting, it's deteriorating a little bit. What do you think I should do? I'll be like, okay, you need to see a restorer. You need to do this, perhaps you need to move it to a storage facility. And it's really about building trust with your clients and just working with them to build collection, which is probably, well, I think it is my favorite aspect of the job is, you work with these clients for years and you can really help build their collection with them. You get to understand what they're looking for, what they want, what they don't want. And it's a real privilege to be let into people's homes and their lives in that way, because some people's private art collections are incredibly private. They don't like loan out or they don't like people seeing it. So I think it's a real privilege in that way. As a head of sale, my role is to basically manage the wholesale from all aspects. So that's not only about consigning and selling, it's about managing the team, all the marketing that we do, making sure everything is sort of proper, all the works are authenticated, there are no issues there, budgets, all of sort of the nitty-gritty stuff that makes the sale a success. So it's quite full on, but I really enjoy it because you can call a sale your own project and see it to fruition. So it's really exciting to start it and then finish it, have a month or two off, and then you start it all again, which is
that sounds really
great.
full on. Yeah. So, but you studied art history and then you did, I think, like a double sort of master's, right, in art history and curatorial studies.
Yes,
So
I did.
Did you learn all those, like, I'm gonna say practical in air quotes aspects of budgeting and sales strategies and marketing in school, or is this something that you kind of pick up on the job?
Oh, definitely on the job. Even now, I struggle with an Excel spreadsheet trying to figure out my budget and my forecasting, but that's just something that I'm trying to get better at with every sale. Yeah, I think that I found with my education, you learn a lot about the history of that, which I think is obviously incredibly important, but sort of all this other hands-on, more practical, all the practical aspects of the auction and sort of the day-to-day running of the sales, you just have to learn on the job. And it certainly was an eye-opener for my first sale last year when I was the first time head of sale. It was a little bit of a shock to the system, but yeah, the teams are great. You always have someone supporting you, so it's good fun.
Yeah, was it when you, because at one point you were probably working for lots of people, and I imagine now you manage a team. Was it a good experience moving from one to another?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it definitely was a shock because, I was more the right-hand person to a lot of people, and then all of a sudden to go and be the person who would delegate. I know I struggled with that a little bit because I wasn't used to it, and it's sort of something that I think a lot of people struggle with, like taking too much on, not delegating, but the team that I work with, they're all really great. We get along super well, and I think the environment at Bonhams is amazing. Everyone's a real team player. It's really nice.
So once you arrived in London, you got a job, then you moved on. Was that then, how can I say, seamless, I guess, because you already were in the field that you wanted, and then did you just have to change areas, or how did it go? Like, do you start when you start an auction as an intern, but then how do you know which, because there are so many things to do. You can go on marketing, right? You can deal with like clients, or there's a lot of logistics involved as well. I think the teams in auction houses are very diverse as well in terms of expertise. So how was your path to figure out, the best place for you? Did you know already, oh, I would like to be head of sales, or?
Yeah, I think that when I was working in Australia, I was in a junior specialist type of role, also sort of managing the Sydney gallery, but the team in Sydney, there were only three of us, so it was a very hands-on team, so you got to do everything. But I knew that when I moved to London, I wanted to move back into the specialist side. The role that I started off here when I was at the other auction house here in London, it was not on the specialist side. It was sort of sat in between specialist and the administration, because as you say, within some of these large auction houses, there are so many roles and routes that you can take. It's incredible. I think it's one thing it can be quite easy to be pigeonholed in these large organizations into a certain path. And I think that if certain people head down a path, it's quite hard to break free and move into another path if you wish. That is something that I see some people struggle with. When I first moved to London, I applied for all these jobs and I met with a lot of people, and I was lucky, really lucky and fortunate to be introduced to someone at Christie's. And so I ended up starting there. But it did feel really difficult to get that first job. And I think, I moved here, felt a little bit more, I felt a little confident that I would easily get a job. And it was a little bit of a rude awakening that it wasn't as easy as I thought it would be. So after doing that, I was a little bit apprehensive at the next time around when I was looking for a new role, but it was a little bit easier. And I think that after working here for a few years, you know more people, you obviously have more experience, and it's one of those things where I think in the art industry, once you hit a certain level, it does get a bit easier to move around, to move to different roles. So it's why hard work and the patience does pay off in the end. You just have to, keep at it.
Yes, and not burning any bridges, because it's a very, very small world.
It's a tiny world. Absolutely.
Yeah. London and New York probably both very difficult in terms of competition, especially in this area. So do you hire people directly for your teams? Do you manage that, or not necessarily?
I think that, we're a really small team at Bonhams compared to the other houses, so we rarely hire. I think that if someone was to join my team, I would definitely have an involvement in that. It hasn't happened since I've been there. The team that I work with, we're really close and we work really well together. So that's nice. It's a good feeling that no one sort of moved on. We're all pretty tight knit. But yeah, I think that if someone was to join my team, I would definitely have a hand in that.
And then, just so we give people that are listening some good advice, what are the things you would look for in like an application or a CV or the candidate? What do you have any tips for anyone who wants to work in an auction house, more or less towards closer to your section, I guess?
I think that when you're working in an auction house, you get worked really hard. And I know that, if anyone's listening who's ever worked in one of the big auction houses, you know that it's quite demanding, can be very stressful. So I would look for someone who, if they haven't had sort of similar experience, can show that they're really dedicated. They're not prepared to get their hands dirty as such, and they're prepared to step in and step up. I always like a small, concise CV, be really punchy and to the point. And look, just ways to stand out, because as we were saying, it's such an incredibly competitive market. Whether that's through, you've interned at various places, or whether you volunteered, whilst you were studying, or in any way, it's just really about standing out, making your mark, and showing that you can bring something to the table that no one else can. Because I think that's the key. There are, if you were going for a position, and especially in a junior role, guaranteed there are so many other people who are going to be applying as well. And it's really about what can you bring to the table and to enhance the team, because we're always looking for someone to join the team and step up and make it better. That's what I would say.
I think for anyone who wants to understand all the roles within an auction house, I think it's important to do some research, because there are so many things you can do. And of course, you need a master's to be a specialist, I would imagine, like in a museum. but potentially if you want to work in marketing or something, you could have different skill sets. Am I
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. And I mean, to be honest, I don't even think that you need, a master's degree to be a specialist. But you're right, there are so many different aspects. There would be, the client advisory department who really just all they do, well, not all they do, so they really focus on looking after clients, and that's sort of their main role across all different departments. So they have an incredible knowledge of everything from jewelry and watches through to furniture to contemporary art. There's obviously like marketing and finance. There are legal teams, research teams, valuation departments. There are a lot of paths that you can take: business intelligence, business development. So, don't be afraid to sort of think outside the box when it comes to auction houses. There's a lot you can do within them.
And Cassie, you said that it can be quite stressful at times working there. I
Yes.
think all jobs have their levels of stress, obviously, but I imagine that you deal with big sales and big clients and a lot of money, right? So
Yes.
you can only imagine the pressure and probably targets and so on. So was this something that you were always very good at with coping with the stress, or did you develop strategies to deal with that?
Do you know, I have to say, I think that my ability to cope with stress deteriorated when I moved to London. It's really interesting. I think I've always found myself to be someone who thrives under pressure, and I produce my best work when I'm under the pump and I'm sort of stressed. But it was really interesting. When I moved here in my last role, it was incredible. I learned a lot, met a lot of great people, both clients and colleagues, but it was really, really stressful. And I didn't know how to deal with it. And before I left, it became a bit of an issue for myself because I would just make myself feel unwell, or, I'd have sort of anxious breathing problems. And it's completely crazy because I think it all came down to my lack of confidence in myself and the ability to do my job, which, I think that I actually did my job really well, but I was always just second guessing and doubting myself. And I think before I left, I definitely got that under control and I learned how to deal with it. Meditation and just trying to take time out for myself, but also it was more of a mindset. I had to switch my mind to be like, you know what, you need to trust your instincts, trust yourself, you can do it, it's fine. I think we all get stressed. I still get really stressed now, but definitely I've learned how to handle it, which I think is a good thing, because I was sort of way too stressed all the time. It wasn't healthy.
No, and I think it is difficult to learn. I think most people that work in the arts are like very passionate about it, and there's a lot of like networking that goes anywhere. That you go to an art fair, or you go to an opening, or you go to this, and there's all these events that you kind of have to attend. And I think that actually goes across most creative industries. If you work in music, you need to attend concerts, you need to meet people. Usually, those people are out as well because they're watching other people and figuring out the
Yeah.
next acts. So it's the same in theater. And so it can be quite demanding on your personal life. And sometimes you realize that everything you're doing is kind of related to work, but because you
Yes.
like work, it's not that much work, but then you don't actually ever switch off. And I think I feel like that's probably one of the biggest learning curves for everyone in this industry.
100%. I agree with that. I always feel like, as you say, when you're at galleries and you're networking, whatever, you're always on. You're always having to, schmooze and not perform, but you're always on show because there's always a client there or there's always someone that you need to meet. And it can be really exhausting. But, you just have to learn how to juggle it and manage it and put a handle on the stress level.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's useful to have a support system around you. And I'm not saying necessarily mentors, but not to feel totally alone wherever you work, right? Build a team or a group of
Absolutely.
colleagues around you. And I think, did you find a collaborative? I mean, you said that the team at Bohem is very supportive, but while you were in London, did you find people to help you throughout your path?
Yeah, I think as well, people, as you say, who work in the arts, we're all really passionate. And so everyone that you work with, you do have a sort of common thread of passion that you share, which is really nice. So I mean, some of my best friends that I now have in London are all people that I've worked with, and we're all incredibly close, not just at this job, but for my previous role, um, which is really nice. You know, we hang out all the time, we go to gallery openings, and it's great. But they're also just incredibly supportive, and I definitely couldn't have got through some of the very stressful times without them, because they're the only people who know really what you're going through and the pressure.
So, Cassie, I'd like to know if there was either one moment where you saw like a very specific artwork that you pinched yourself and asked if this was your real life, or if there was a big sale that you worked that is forever dear to your heart and you will remember as a big moment in your career.
Yeah, there is actually. There's one little work that stands out for me, which is a Lucian Freud in my previous role, which very tiny, beautiful little painting, which everyone had sort of known about, but no one had seen for years. And I remember the client ended up bringing it in, and they were like, "Oh, we're not sure. We think it's a Freud." And I was with my director at the time, and we looked at it and we're like, "Oh, this is a Freud," and it's amazing. It was so beautiful. It was just incredibly delicate, really enigmatic, and just it's beautiful. I mean, he's one of my favorite artists. So to see something that had sort of been hidden away for a really long time and to be one of the first people to see it outside of that family, it was a real privilege. I mean, to be honest, there have been so many. I really enjoyed when, in my previous role, we sold the Hockney double pool portrait. That was beautiful. But also, you know, more recently, some smaller works, which, you know, it's not necessarily on the higher end of the spectrum, but in June this year, I sold two really beautiful small portraits by Amoako Boafo, whose sort of star is on the rise at the moment. And, you know, if you are familiar with his works, you know why. They're so incredibly intimate, these portraits that he paints. And these two little works were very small, works on card, but they were, I don't know, so powerful. And it was a real privilege to work with them. And they sold very well, and the client was very happy, but also the buyer was really happy. And yeah, it was really fun to work on.
That sounds amazing. We'll put links to all the artists you said so that people can look them up. Because you studied art history, then you obviously specialize in contemporary art. What is it about contemporary art that you love?
Do you know, it's so funny because I actually studied like not contemporary art at uni. I focused on Baroque patronage, more or less on Caravaggio actually. But I was sort of thrown into contemporary art, and now I love it. I wouldn't think of working in any other sort of department or genre. I think contemporary art is it can push the boundaries. It's so interesting in many ways. You can have artists who, you know, I mean, I have a lot of friends who don't really know that much about art, and if I show them something, their first response is, I could have painted that, or a child could have painted that. It's like, but they didn't, and neither did you, and just don't talk to me, essentially. But I think that's the thing. It's always interesting. It's always pushing the boundaries, and it's always topical. It can often be political. Maybe it's not political. I think that contemporary art just has a lot to say, and it's always exciting for me to access and see new artists. But also, I sort of also work in post-war and contemporary art, so there are artists who are already really established who've been working on certain projects for years, and it's still always exciting to see what they come up with because they are masters of what they do. So I think there's such a broad spectrum of contemporary art that you could never get bored of it. That's what I love. There's sort of endless possibilities for me.
That's true. So would you give us the name of some Australian artists that you like that we should know? They don't need to be contemporary. They can be dead or
Yeah.
alive.
No, sure. I'll put in a plug for one of my best friends. Her name is Searing Hannaford. She's an incredible portrait painter. We went to uni together, actually. But her father is also a very important and famous portrait painter in Australia as well. And but Searing is making her own name and doing her own thing. She is a finalist again in the Archibald Portrait Prize. And I think now she has for quite a few years been a finalist, which is an incredible feat. It's pretty much the most coveted art prize in Australia, and it always attracts the best and top artists in the country. So she has this incredible way with paint, very gestural, but also very intimate. She's someone to watch. There's another artist called Alex Seaton. He is a marble sculptor. His works are incredible. He imports all these huge slabs of marble into his studio. I was really fortunate enough to go and visit his studio earlier this year when I was back home. Alex often has something kind of political to say. That I remember seeing his work back when I was at uni in one of the exhibitions at the Art Gallery of SA. And I don't know if you know, but back in Australia we do have a really kind of checkered past of immigration. So there was a campaign of Stop the Boats, where these poor refugees were trying to, you probably heard of it. It's horrible, like what happened, all these refugees were trying to come across on the boats, and the government was stopping them, and so many people died. It was really horrific and really inhumane. And he created this sculptural installation piece, and they were of the life jackets of the people who died in one of the boats. And so it was so moving. I remember the room was quite dark, and the life jackets were just lit very softly but very powerfully. And you walked in, and it's marble is such like a cold and hard medium, but also it was just, I don't know, it was so powerful the way that he had created this moment in time that was so sad, and yet we could do nothing. Well, we could do nothing for them, but it's like, what can we do for people trying to escape their life and make a better life for themselves? Do we treat them like this? Really, really powerful. I would urge anyone to look up his work. He's great. And there's another artist who I really love. His name is Dale Frank. He is an abstract painter. They're just really often large and decorative works where he creates these sort of myriads of color which really draw you in to the surface. They're really fun. I like his work a lot.
That sounds amazing. Yeah, I think art tends to be political, whether it tries to be or not. I mean, it's very difficult to see art without the context around it, especially in our times. So my last art-related question to you, Cassie, is if you could have anything in your living room, what would it be?
Oh my gosh, that is honestly the hardest question ever as well. And I get asked about this all the time, and I can never give one answer. Or if I do, I caveat it with about 5 other works that I just chuck on at the end, or it changes constantly.
Well, you can have a big living room. You can have more than one. I'll allow it.
Okay. I would really like a Lee Krasner painting. I think she is incredible. I don't know if you saw her show at the Barbican last year. So good, so stunning. And I, of course, knew who she was, and, sort of as maybe more as the wife of Pollock. But I don't think I'd ever really looked and studied her works and her oeuvre before. And I just completely fell in love, and I would love to have one of her works. Love a Cecily Brown. I think she's amazing. Also a Joan Mitchell. I've gone for a very female artist themed here, but I would really like one of those.
That's great. Well, the female brand is very on brand with what we're doing here, so that's absolutely fine. And I think we need to give each other more shout outs, There's a lot of famous guys already. It's okay.
Exactly.
Guys, it's been so lovely to speak to you.
Thank you for having me.
And if anyone wants to reach out to you and invite you for a coffee or a tea, what should they get you? What do you like to drink? Because you're in Aussie, I imagine you like coffee.
I'm ashamed to say, but I don't drink coffee, which I know, I think that's sacrilege for an Australian. I actually enjoy an English breakfast tea. No, here you go. If you want to pin me down, I'm always on the hunt for a really good chai latte because I don't drink coffee. And when I was in Australia, chai latte was really common and very good. Never find a good chai latte here in London. Okay. So if anyone knows where there's a really good sweet but not too sweet chai latte, give me a shout. I'll come meet you for one. Very happy to do so.
Perfect. We'll put them down so anyone can send you some recommendations on Instagram. I know of one and I don't drink it, but I'll send you mine.
Yeah, please do.
Amazing. Cassie, thanks so much for coming on. And for everyone listening, everything that Cassie said is going to be on the show notes, all the artists, all the links, so you can go and explore amazing art yourself. But thanks, Cassie. I'll speak to you soon.
Thanks, Isabel.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the I Like Networking podcast. Please remember to share, subscribe, and review the podcast so that more people can find us. All the information discussed on this episode will be on the show notes. See you next time.